Welcome to Swimming with Allocators,
the VC podcast from the LP perspective,
with your hosts, Alexa Benz
and Ernest Sweat. You ready? Let's dive in. Welcome to our guest, Malcolm Robinson, founder of the Black Venture Capital Consortium, BVCC, which trained HCBU students for careers in venture capital and startups. Previously, Malcolm was at Prudential for 7 years in private credit and private equity, and then in Asia for nearly 20 years as general partner at Avenue Capital Group, where he launched and grew their Asia Alternative Assets Group to over $5 billion. We'll hear today about his experience investing out of his family office, Montclair Capital Group, and forming the Black LP Association. Thank you, Malcolm. Why don't we start today talking about Montclair Capital, your family office. Curious how you think about your personal allocation as it relates to venture or generally.
Sure. First, I would say family office is a fancy word for invest your own money. It means it's definitely in that category for me, although, as you know, there are some that are very official family offices that have a number of investment professionals and different platforms. So having said that, the way I've approached it is opportunistically. I'm an investor at heart. I've always been a direct investor in many asset classes, and this was just an extension of that. But in this time, it happened to be with my own money. So the key is opportunistic. I would look for different cycles. Sometimes it's a real estate cycle. Sometimes it was the equity cycles. Got particularly more interested in venture capital going back about 7 years now. And just maintaining that opportunistic view, and having been a professional for 25 years, had a broad network of both at some banks and also funds and just other individuals, not just in the US, but across the world, where I would tap into that sort of deal flow. But I also made investments as an LP. It was a common direct investment, but a number as an LP.
Malcolm, we spoke a number of times, and I've always just been enamored by your experience as an allocator across a number of different asset classes. Can you speak to just that experience and how it kind of shaped your approach to venture capital as an allocator?
Sure. Again, I would start with the fact that I did the majority of my career on the direct investment side, and that's going to definitely inform how I am as an LP. So, for instance, when you're an LP, there's a certain process you go through as it relates to the management, the GP, as it relates to the target or investment universe that they're going to invest in. Also relates to some competing funds, and then it's overlay macro and all that kind of stuff. So that lens will never leave me. But the additional thing you do take into account when you're LP is you overlay some of the portfolio construction on, it's almost like in Star Trek when they're doing the 3D chess. Like when you're a GP, it's just your allocation. So now you have that portfolio construction at the investment fund, but also in your own. So taking that into consideration was a bit interesting, because sometimes it allows you as an LP to take on certain risk you wouldn't necessarily take it because you're more diversified than that individual GP. And I always knew that when I was just a GP, but it was interesting actually playing that out in real time when I made certain considerations. For instance, and VC is example Exhibit A, where you get so much more exposure as an LP in VC. And I would also say that the co-investment opportunity in VC is particularly of interest to LPs, active LPs, as opposed to the, if we're just doing private credit. I don't think too many people are going to be co-investing on private credit. But VC, there can very interesting deals because it's all about that the curve of you only need a couple of huge home runs, and then having that value of being an LP and getting co-investment rights to see certain deals that you otherwise wouldn't is extremely important. And obviously, get that as a GP. So there are some additional layers to factor in from the lens of a pure LP as opposed to GP. And so what I try to do is I try to blend the two.
And getting access to quality co-investment it's pretty tough as a solo solo investor investing your own capital. Any how-tos or recommendations on what's worked really well for you, given that's your skill set, but also still having access to it when you're not full time?
Yeah, I agree. However, what I would say is there are some advantages to being a smaller check writer because the competition doesn't really exist now, right? So you can, and that's A, and then B, at that point, it's all about value add. And I do believe that in a number of areas, so for instance, any founder who's trying to take their business to Asia, well, I invested in Asia for almost 20 years. I have tremendous relationships out there. Anybody trying to get to those markets, I could definitely add value. Same thing for other industry jurisdictions. So I do think it's always a combination. When you're not the lead investor, you have to position yourself as to what value you bring to the situation. I think you talk to some companies where I've invested directly, but also BVCC does actually have an active fund where we write checks out of that fund. Where even though we tend to be smaller check sizes, I think a number of our founding companies would view us as a value, and that one of them, actually one of the more successful ones we've met, I literally speak with the founder every 2 weeks, and he's done a fantastic job. So I think bringing that value add, since it's not in the number of zeros behind your check, definitely makes out of the box, and I think that's somewhat sometimes refreshing for founders. The other thing is when you're making a check from your family office, the other advantage you have is you don't have an artificial deadline, right? So
Yeah.
have that. It's just the nature of the business. And I think that gives the ability to look through certain time horizons that maybe a fund couldn't do. Now, obviously, there's huge advantage to running a fund, but I'm just pointing out some of the ways that you can position yourself as a non-fund investor for those other family offices out there.
Yeah. No, I appreciate too that you are investing in things that you know more about than the average too. So in terms of co-investment, you're getting into things that are not unfamiliar to you,
Exactly.
which I'm sure is improving your track record over the average.
That is sometimes a barrier. It's the speed and also the lack of, because you just don't get the same amount of information as a co-investor. You don't get the same amount. So that's a good point. That having that background definitely helps in taking advantage of that co-investment.
When you're looking at a fund manager and kind of assessing the opportunities out there to be an LP in venture today, what's kind of your criteria, and how did you come up with that criteria?
Sure. So this is where I was going earlier with blending the two views. Without a doubt, I think LPs do a fantastic job of analyzing. What I try to do is I really try to understand that you have to look at the track record and the definition of track record. I believe the more fluid it is, the better. For instance, it could be a run-of-the-mill track record, but for certain asset classes, what you really want to know is, can they source, or do they have expertise in that, and what's their sort of post value add. So I really try to hone in on that middle piece, really try to understand, is this group an expert on what they're going to invest in? And not necessarily first year review of how many years, but just really have a GP to conversation about that asset class. That's where I've literally invested in every asset class planet, except for
Mm.
actually in crypto, but everything else. And as a consequence, I can ask those GP to GP type questions, and then I can really understand, are they experts in the field? The other thing I put a tremendous amount of effort into when I'm an LP is the opportunity set, the investment opportunity. And I think that really worked for me well when I was a GP out in Asia, is that the opportunity set was fantastic because it was right after the um, we really dug into, we were doing our own fundraising. Was obviously we were conveying that we were experts, but the opportunity set was very important. So those two things, um, like I said, you have to look at the track record per se, but then I really dig into their level of expertise and why they believe this opportunity set is an interesting opportunity. Now, you could say this a private equity. That's a pretty broad, generic term. I would really try to dig into their specific target market and what they're really focused on, so that I understand. Do I believe that that is a target market? So, if I do believe, I believe they're expert, then I'm writing that check, irrespective if they have the standard um, you know, track record that shows 10 years. And clearly, they need to be experienced in that. But to me, I go more for their expertise and the opportunity over, is it a track record that they own? And that's been my approach. And I think part of my approach is driven by the fact that I was a GP.
Is there an opportunity that you're especially excited about, or actively looking for more VC managers in that space? Because maybe you've been convinced on the opportunity but haven't met the team.
Well, one of the ones where I'm active as an angel, but also the small fund that I do manage. We're particularly focused on healthcare and also deep. I think that the pendulum swings between deep tech, or let's say SaaS, and the technological advances in software, where I think having the CTO chops from a software perspective and infrastructure perspective was hugely important, is less important. I'm not saying it's not important, but it's less important because of so modular now. If you really dig down and ask, how they're putting together their app or their tech platform, there's a lot of modular building, meaning that they're taking a lot of open source things and putting them together. Nothing wrong with that. The point is, it sort of de-emphasizes a little bit on that skill set. On the other hand, there's a lot of exciting things going on in deep tech that are exploding in terms of where the opportunities. And then I feel the same way about healthcare. That I've been looking at healthcare for over 30 years, and it was about, but there were several bottlenecks that had to be addressed before it really could take off. So coincidentally, healthcare is behind the curve in terms of, as it relates to, you go into the doctor's office or you go get MRI machine, those are all leading edge technology. So I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about other uses of automation and other uses of big data that have not necessarily been incorporated into healthcare, either in the care delivery or even in the back office. I mean, I think Exhibit A would be Olive, right? Olive AI. They were a high-flying healthcare tech company that actually was listed, and they fell out because at the end of the day, they weren't able to deliver what they promised. And a lot of those were some bottlenecks. Now, ironically, even though it was all of AI, the AI is going to help them. They were just sort of 1 year too early on that. But those are the two areas broadly, healthcare and deep tech, that I'm particularly interested.
GPs always complain about how hard it is to find family offices. And so I was just wanted to hear kind of like your perspective from being a GP yourself to now being an LP, how do you like to hear about managers? How do you source?
Yeah, I do think, because at least with the endowments and the pension funds, and the foundations, that they exist. You Google them. So that's half the battle: is do they exist or not, and who you're talking to. With the family offices, it's the exact opposite. You could literally be walking down the street and you just pass by somebody's, or anywhere, even in the smaller cities in the United States. So that has been a very difficult nut to crack. As a matter of fact, that's one of the initiatives we're doing at BLPA. Is some of our members are family offices, and we are trying to address that, Ernest, that very thing. And I think part of it is these are two ships that don't really, they're passing by the night. There's family offices and a lot of diverse asset managers we focus on at BLPA. So just letting them both know that they both exist, I think, is huge. The other thing is, to be more specific, Ernest, is once you do know they exist, there is a different cadence or different process. Again, there are mega family offices, so I'm not talking about those, because that's going to be closer to an institutional LP that just may have a little less restrictions. But the more traditional, smaller family office, where they might have 1 to 3 people, they don't have a lot of bandwidth, but they also don't necessarily need to take a top-down approach, which is hugely important from the GP perspective. Now, what is difficult is to know, once that a family office exists, is what is it that they're focused on? Because if indeed they're not taking a top-down approach like most institutional LPs are, then how do you even know if what you're focused on is of interest? So that match up is much more tricky. However,
Yeah.
once it does, I think it flips, and then it's easier. So if you want to compare the two, if you're a GP approaching institutional LPs, as I said, you know who they are, and eventually you should be able to try to get a meeting with somebody there. But that process could be very long, and it's very institutionalized, rightfully so. There's nothing wrong with that. The flip side is, from the family offices, the front part is very difficult. Who are they?
Yeah.
Do they exist? Are they interested in what I'm doing? But once you do find the ones who are interested in what you do, then that process is highly accelerated,
Mm.
assuming that they think that you're an interesting GP. So we are trying to deal with the front end part of that, because the back end takes care of itself. Now, in addition to that, there are a number of conferences. There's a number of family office groups that you can try to approach, but those come with their own, issues too. How do you approach them? And we're trying to deal with that also, trying to get more connection with some of those summits, some of those groups.
Now we're going to take a quick break to speak with our sponsor.
On the show today, we have industry expert and sponsor Luc Gedres, a professional hockey player and now territory manager for the SF Bay area at Camber Road. Camber is the most effective, flexible leasing company for venture-backed businesses. Thank you, Luc, for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be on.
Absolutely. You are based in San Francisco, where hardware and frontier tech are having a moment. How do you think AI and automation are going to improve the viability of this hardware ecosystem, specifically when it comes to financing and investing in the projects?
Yeah, I think AI is everywhere, right? We hear it in every bit, in frontier tech, it's software, it's all AI, right? And the one thing that I've kind of stuck out, or what I've been hearing in the market, what I think about a lot when it comes to frontier tech and how I think it's going to change, is hard tech is hard, right? Everybody's heard that for a really long time. And AI sort of makes those things easier. Not easy, but easier, right? So I think there's some risk that's being taken away, because AI and automation are going to continue to improve. That will hopefully reduce risk for investors, reduce risk for folks that maybe on the investor side that aren't as frontier tech focused. There's always been the funds that are frontier tech focused or kind of cutting edge, but now we're seeing a lot of generalists starting to kind of get into this play of hard tech, and hardware is not as scary anymore. And I think AI and automation are driving a lot of that. There's faster time to markets. There's improved kind of returns, hopefully, because there'll be improved kind of reduction of costs because AI and automation are doing a lot of those things. Everything's more cost effective. And there's a lot more innovation that's happening because of that. And things are happening quicker. Iterations are happening quicker. So I think all of that helps broaden kind of the who wants to be involved with hardware and who wants to be involved with frontier tech. And that obviously just kind of keeps rolling upon itself to get more people involved. You get more investors, you get more people looking at frontier tech, and hardware being hard isn't necessarily a bad thing anymore. It's not as scary as it once was. And I think that's really a big positive. And a lot of that is driven from the AI and automation being more in everybody's everyday life, right? We're seeing it all over. It's kind of unavoidable. And it's not just a software program. There has to be that hardware, and there has to be that hard tech, that tangible thing that usually goes along with the doing, whether it's robotics, right? Or something that's a little bit more tangible. And I think people are getting a little bit more comfortable with the hardware risk that comes with it.
And you are part of sort of financing that. Can you share any trends you're seeing on hardware is notoriously so expensive? Are more people now calling you because this is taking off?
I think we're probably a little bit more popular, which is good. We like to be popular, cool kid at the lunch table kind of feeling.
Totally.
It's no, I think we're getting a lot more interest in companies that they're trying to figure out how can they be the most cost effective and how can they kind of diversify their capital stack, because it's a little bit different, right? It's notoriously hard, like you said. And hey, now they're getting a little bit more interest. So now we're seeing a lot of these companies that might get funding, but it's not as easy as it was maybe a few years ago where equity funding was kind of everywhere. So how do I take the equity funding that I am getting and making sure that I'm using, that to the best of its abilities and complementing it with our financing, finding a non-dilutive partner that can help extend out that runway. Hey, can we use this to complement the equity, and maybe find a venture debt partner as well, and kind of build the three stools of a capital stack, right? We're seeing a lot more of that in terms of how else are we kind of financing and what do we want to be looking at.
You got to call Luc.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it, Luc.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for being on the show. If any of you listening have portfolio companies interested in buying stuff, whether that's heavy equipment or laptops, you can reach out to Camber Road's managing partner, Steve Aronson, ARONSON at camberroad.com for equipment financing. And now back to our LP interview. It sounds incredibly helpful what you are creating for fellow LPs with the Black LP Association. Can you tell us more about the association and how you all work together?
Sure. So it came about in 2019. It's as I was becoming more and more of an active LP, I started going to more OP meetings, and seeing that although I personally don't believe that, I believe that hopefully there'll be more diverse LP, diverse professionals in the LP industry. There's certainly a lot more now than when I was actively raising money 20 years ago and raised $5 billion. So that was sort of a wake-up call for me. And then I looked around and saw that there was no organization that's particularly focused on the diverse LP. Fast forward, today we're over 85 members. BLPA has more than the members themselves, a day job, work for LPs that have in excess of $1 trillion of AUM. And of the over 20 are CIOs, another 5 or 10 are deputy CIOs. Then you have a big slug of individuals who are senior investment officers, usually in charge of an asset class. And many of those assets, most of those asset classes are in alternative investment space. And then you have 5 to 10 family offices. So we came about, again, there's a leadership committee of 5 other individuals plus myself. So I view myself as a co-founder, not a founder. So there's 4 or 5 other co-founders who came together. And we have mandates. One is professional development, networking, sharing notes on, how to navigate becoming a CIO or deputy CIO, things like that. But the other mandate is trying to help shepherd more allocation for qualified diverse asset managers. And it's a loose situation, so there's no binding. It's where think of it more as a platform where we are providing GP an audience that they otherwise don't have. And again, when I was raising $5 billion, I wish I had that audience. It made life a lot easier. It's good to have aggregated audiences. So that's what we do. We meet several times a year, and we accomplish those two mandates. When we meet, we usually meet once in New York in the fall, and we meet in LA around the Milken conference. And then we, throughout the year, may have, those are in person, that we jump on Zoom. And then we try to support like regional meetups, because our members are across the country, although I would say there's a predominant number, no surprise, between Boston down to DC in that quarter, and also in the Midwest Great Lakes area is where I would say between those two regions, we probably have 65 members.
Wow. There's been a growing focus in venture as well as private equity overall in the number of diverse emerging managers, and that being more of a focus. We're seeing a lot more emerging manager programs, whether they're mentorship or actual allocation going to them. What do you think an organization like yours, the Black LP Association, how they can play in the overall growth of that allocation in these really, really important asset classes?
Absolutely. It's a great question. There's a couple of ways. One is I literally just came from a meeting with one of the largest LPs in the country, addressing that very issue about how can we work together to deal with that, because they are expanding their emerging manager program and ways that we work together. And I've met with probably 4 or 5 very large institutions in that same capacity with my BLPA hat on. Also, there are other organizations out there. IDAC is one of them, and others that have similar strategies or missions, I should say, of trying to. And I'm also on the advisory committee of the precursor of IDAC when they merged. So there's a number of organizations. I think if we work together and stay cross-pollinated, that's very helpful. So we don't have to recreate the wheel. But I think ultimately, Ernest, the issue is a couple things. One is exposure. There's a whole ecosystem where you have consultants, you have OCIOs, obviously you have in-house staff, and there's a lot of people who know each other, but there's an awful lot of people who don't. So I think if you and I had this conversation 10 years ago, the list of diverse asset managers, not just in VC, but across the board, has exploded in the last 10 years, which is a very good thing. However, what has not exploded is the AUM. The number of GP, but the AUM itself in aggregate has not. Now, the fantastic job, and rightfully so, have grown their AUM quite large. There's not. But there's another group that are just fantastic, but great experience and a really strong track record. And that's the group that we really focus on. And I would include in that emerging managers. I mean, remember, I have a broader definition of track record. A person who's been working in private equity for 20 years, but maybe one of the large houses, clearly they can't take that, they don't own that portfolio in terms of track record, but they can walk you through the deals that they did and how well they've done. And to me, that's a track. They have all the essential things. So I think people use more logical criteria, meaning using a track record is really a proxy. It's a proxy for, can they do it? But you can dissect that and really look at other things and get to the same conclusion that, yes, I believe they can do it, and here's why. Again, can they source, do the proper analysis? Can they come to the right decision at the right time? And can they do post support? And that goes across every asset class, not just VC. So we try to encourage people to take that type of approach when you're looking at the traditional definition of emerging manager, meaning either their first fund or so there's a number of platforms, or I would say conversations that are being had out there. And I would say that it's progressed where it is now versus before. Now, having said that, as you know, fundraising in VC is extremely difficult right now. Because of where we are in the cycle and because of the amount of allocation that LP has. But if you kind of step back and look at it more from a 20, 30,000 foot level, these cycles take time. So it's very challenging right now, but it won't always be. And I do think that the key is to, regardless of the size of AUM, is to stay active, somehow figure out how to be an active investor. And there's less active than more active, but active is the key. Because I think when you do that, as you do get a lot of credit for that. And I do think eventually LPs do recognize that. And you do differentiate from others who might have had to maybe put their plans on hold because of the tough fundraising environment, particularly for VC.
And you are in rare air as a diverse GP who has raised $5 billion plus. Any suggestions, maybe specifically on Asia? That would be really interesting to hear. A lot of people right now, I think, are taking trips to Japan and looking to raise from the Asian markets. Any tips?
Sure. And kind of back to the stuff before. Yes, I did raise $5 billion. It's crazy. It's almost that was for private equity distressed in Asia. Our sort of North Star when we were doing it was to really highlight differentiation. I've probably looked at, probably about it, but dozens and dozens investor decks, and I've given a lot of feedback. And one of the things that I've noticed is that, just pointing out the asset class you want to do and showing that experience is not differentiation, right? So differentiation is the next level down. And so one of the most consistent advice that I do is really think about that LP, especially if it's the type of LP where they specialize by asset class, which is most. So literally, that LP is seeing 10 other PE funds a day, and then they do this days a year. So they know about private equity. They get it.
You can skip that slide.
Well, not necessarily, but you can't only have. Right? And it's going down in that differentiation. I can't. Now the other thing is, not always. I don't think really in private equity you have to, but there are asset classes where the risk mitigation is a huge part of it, and that's one of the things that we excelled at in Asia. I would say that was one of our breakthroughs. That I literally wrote a white paper that explained how the risk of investing in Asian distressed debt matched up to other things that they were more familiar with, because this is back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and Asian distressed debt was not a thing, right? We were inventing it as we're going along. And so one of the common things I kept getting was, well, yeah, but it seems like the reward will take care of itself because the potential returns were great. But nobody knew, was that risk appropriate or not? And that turned out to be the bottleneck. So as I said, I literally wrote a white paper that it really broke the logjam. Once people understood how Asian distressed debt matched up to other risk buckets, then they got it, and that's when we really took off, and the billions started to come in. So that was a part of it. As we
Awesome.
today, or just Asia in general. What I would say is, we say Asia, obviously, but it really is how you define your market: 10 to 15 different individual markets. Number one, and each jurisdiction has a different set of rules, different sectors that are driving the economy. So that goes without saying. But the other thing is that the level of transparency is different out there. So there's no substitute for on the ground research. I'm talking about the GP. Obviously, LP, you're going to rely on the GP. But for the GP, they themselves need a significant portion of their team in Asia. And Asia should be beyond just Hong Kong and Singapore. You have to be out in the field too, or at least if you're there, you travel out to the field, because a lot of ways that you get an edge in Asia is having proprietary research, but only if you have boots on the ground.
Malcolm, with your expertise of being a fund manager, how do you approach value add as an allocator, as an LP? Is that sitting on kind of the LP board? Is it just advising them on how to go out to international markets and raise? Where do you kind of lean in when you sign up as an LP?
So this is value add as an LP, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
You mean above and beyond?
Yes, exactly.
Environment, that's a lot of value add.
That is. Some people just leave it there. Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. I put you in business. Yeah, that's enough.
But
I wish some of my LPs had just left it at that.
Yeah, that's true.
You end up being the real value add.
Fourth earners, so the additional value add. No,
yeah.
Kidding, but you're right. As an LP, there is a lot of value add. I think usually it can be, as you alluded to, like either a geographic value add, it can be an industry, it could be a function. I mean, if you want to talk about, I think function is hugely important. I think having people, especially if you're talking family offices, or if you're talking about that type of LP, you're going to have a lot of different backgrounds. Some people have their own business. They had to have a lot of go-to-market expertise, a lot of how to build a business. Now, obviously, the GPs are investing in founders, but a lot of their founders, I've come across, a lot of the hitting the wall is the go-to-market, right? So I think having an LP who understands those functional expertise or the geographic expertise or the asset class is very helpful. Clearly, as we just, any GP going to Asia or their companies, then obviously they can give me a call on that. This panel or so, investing in it. But you're going to have a lot of other LPs who have, certain types of expertise too. And it is a good, I'm glad you raised it, because I would say that just like founders should reach up to their GPs, I think you're right. I think that GPs should reach up. What I would say so far is most of the value add people have reached out to me as GP has been in the fund, which I need that first. But I would encourage them to do it on the other side too. But a lot of it has been on the fundraising side.
I know one other value add is through your association with the Black Venture Capital Consortium. You've placed hundreds of interns in tech companies and venture capital internships in order to change the face of finance. If any VCs are interested in taking on interns, how do they get in touch?
I have that right here. No, they can either directly, or we do have a website, BVCC, that they can reach out through. But, we do work closely with, a group near and dear to Earnest, which is Black Venture. So I'll give a shout out to them.
Yeah.
Ourselves as a pipeline. Um, but we do have relationships and partnerships with over 40 venture capital funds, some of the biggest, some of the smallest, everything in between. And that's just been organic, where it's been word of mouth. The BVCC, sure that your audience understands, there's one group called BLPA, which you and I were just discussing, Black LPS. There's another group, BVCC, I also founded and am the executive director, which is Black Venture Consortium. The consortium was when we first started. As an LP, I was investing in a number of these new emerging Black GP. And we were talking, and my view was, hey, I believe as an LP that you guys can do a great job, and they have, and I'll make a lot of money with you. But we need to make sure that there's a pipeline of rising talent behind you, and that's part of what Black VC does. And so the consortium part was because we need two sides of the market. I'm going to go. I'm a proud alum of University, FAMU. It's an HBCU, and I believe there's a ton of talent there. So I'm going to go find top performers there. We're going to expose them. We're going to educate them. We're going to train them through a number of our programs, and they're going to be ready. But I need the demand side for them. So the consortium part was, indeed, there was an initial 5 or 6 funds that came together with us and said, okay, fine, we will take your interest. So we had them. And from there, it just was word of mouth, and we grew it to 40 something. So usually people do find us. And like I said, we have a website, and more than happy to, if they reach out to you guys, and get my email and we can talk about it. We'd love to have additional partners, never have enough. We have placed a lot into the industry, both internship and full-time. For some of those who might be a little bit younger in this podcast, we also, in internships, we have fellowships. Give a big shout out to both the Ford Foundation and Bank. They are our backers or sponsors to help us do this, pull it off. And Silicon Valley Bank helped us launch a where once they graduate, we can sponsor them for 12 to 18 months as a full-time investment analyst at over the, and that helps us place a number of individuals full-time into VC. As Ernest can attest to you, it is difficult to break into VC, right? It's a chicken and egg. No VCs want to train, no VCs want to have any of that, but they always want somebody who's experienced. So how does that happen? So we're fortunate to have the fellowship program to help provide additional experience for the individuals who make it into our fellowship.
Malcolm, you've definitely inspired me from your work as a direct investor to like your ability to see white space and mobilize for great causes. Just curious, before we end, was there anything else that we might have missed that you're a busy man that you wanted to bring up?
No, I just, the last thing I would say is there's always an opportunity in every market, and when things like now, specifically for your VC GPs, it's unequivocally it's a tough market, but you just have to believe that at some point it will change, and it will. So keep at it, and I do really know how hard it is, but if you keep at it, hopefully it will be successful.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thanks for the pep talk. If nothing, everybody
Absolutely.
appreciates that too.
I needed that. Thank you so much. Malcolm, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. It was great to have you.
This has been great.
See you later, Allocator.
After Portfolio Tile, investing with a smile.